And today we have with us Rebecca Kimbel, and she's a local from Eureka, California. So thank you so much. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you very much. I am one of 39 children born to my father's 6 wives. I was born in slavery. I was sold into slavery. I was bred as a slave, right here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. When I was a child, there were hundreds of stories just like mine. Today, there are thousands. I've had people contact me and say, "You have no right to paint polygamy with one brush." Oh, really? If you study polygamy and you want the statistics on polygamy worldwide and the damage it does to women and children, please get on a website called Stop Polygamy in Canada and read some of the best in the world, research, psychologists, psychiatrists, from polygamy in all countries. It is a proven fact that when countries accept polygamy, poverty soon follows. No man, no matter how hard he tries, if he tries, can take care of the psychological, emotional, financial, and educational needs of a large family with one wife, let alone as many children as he can possibly spawn by many wives. The more a woman shares her husband, the less of a husband he has. It's a fact that the degree of abuse in all human relationships is in direct proportion to the distance between the empowered and the unempowered. Therefore, polygamy has a great deal more abuse than monogamy, because the empowerment of the man and the wife are so far apart. In polygamy, a woman becomes more and more and more and more disempowered. And as she gets older and her husband takes younger and younger and younger women, she becomes more depressed, more unhappy. Statistics show that children born in polygamous families, more often than not, grow up with the same psychological and emotional problems as children born in the ghetto in fatherless homes. Women that grow up in polygamous families grow up feeling they have no rights because their rights are diminished all along the way. I get a lot of emails from people that say, "This is so unfair. You know nothing. Look at Sister Wives on TV. Look at that wonderful family." Now I'm going to tell you about my wonderful family. Kody Brown and I share a maternal grandfather. His youngest wife, Christine, is my cousin. Kody is a member of the AUB, that is the Apostolic United Brethren. That's the cult that I was born into. Joe Darger wrote a book called Love Times 3. He's in the magazines now with these 3 beautiful women, his wives. People say, "You know nothing about Joe Darger." Oh, really? I have a sister, a cousin, and a niece that married Dargers, and Joe's 2 twin wives are my nieces. I knew the Darger family very well. The basic psychological and emotional thread or glue that ties these polygamous groups together is their belief system. In the religious concepts of polygamy, there is more abuse than if there was no religion involved at all. If it's Islamic, if it's Christian polygamy, if it's people that claim and blame Mormonism, they believe and teach that women have no rights. They believe and teach that women should follow and be obedient in order to be accepted. Women are supposed to serve compliant, obedient, breedable slaves. They are there to serve. They also teach that if a woman does not accept polygamy sweetly when her husband takes another wife, Something's wrong with her. She has an evil spirit. If a woman is jealous, has her feeling hurt, is caught crying, or is anything but gracious about it, she is wicked. Something's wrong with her. When you watch Sister Wives and you see Kody Brown, Mary, his first wife, says, well, it helps us overcome our negative feelings. No, it doesn't. It helps her push it down and lie to herself and pretend she doesn't have any. Today, now, as I speak, the judge is out in Utah trying to make a decision whether or not to decriminalize polygamy. Polygamy isn't prosecuted now in Utah as polygamy. It's against the law, but it's not prosecuted. So since it isn't prosecuted, they say, well, look at the gay marriages. They've got all that going on, so surely we must decriminalize polygamy. They are not comparable. Gay marriages are not trying to say, I have all the rights and you have none. There is not one polygamous man I've ever met in my life, and I know thousands of them, literally, not one that would want one of his wives to have another mate. On the contrary, they have a right to condemn her to hell, the loss of her salvation for time and all eternity, take her children away from her, let her lose her family, or make her lose her family. In these cults, and they are cults, the reason they're cults is because it isn't freedom of choice. The polygamous women, including my relatives on TV, they get up and say, this is our choice. And they've been asked, do you have your free agency to choose? And they say yes. Let me tell you what our free agency means. We have books that are called the Journal of Discourses. These books are in almost every polygamous family that claims or blames Mormonism. Now please note I said claims or blames because they openly admit they don't even belong to the Mormon Church, never did. But by blaming the Mormon Church because there was polygamy in Mormon history, they have found a haven in Utah because Utah doesn't like to prosecute because they have a lot of ancestors that were polygamous and they don't want to deal with the problem. So they have managed to hold Utah hostage. We have gotten so far away from what is right and so many arguments over who is right. What is right is just falling through the cracks. There's nobody protecting human rights. Human rights are given up. This doesn't just apply to fundamentalist Mormon polygamy. It applies to Islamic polygamy and all polygamy, but especially polygamy done in the name of religion. Child brides are common in Islamic polygamy. They're common where I came from. We deny it because we were taught that all of you people that don't believe the way that we believe are infidels, and you're not entitled to the truth. We're God's chosen people on earth, and you're subservient. We were taught that we're a white supremacy group, but that's a holy secret. Don't tell anybody. Women don't have rights. They're property. But that's a holy secret because in heaven we're going to put a crown on their head and name them a goddess. But nothing will change. They'll still have a baby as often as possible because they believe they're going to have enough wives and enough children to literally populate their own planet and become a god. How interesting it is that a multiplicity of mates makes a man a god, and the same behavior condemns a woman to death, to hell, or whatever the man wants to carry out. Did I say to death? Yes. In the Journal of Discourses, Volume 4, we have blood covenants where we are taught that when the Lord puts the church in order, that blood covenants will be carried out for people that turn away from the faith and break the rules and whatnot to save their soul. They will only be killed to save their soul because we love them. When I was a child, one of my half-brothers brought a friend in. The friend he brought in saw me, went to my father, decided to arrange a marriage. My father wasn't living where I was living with my mom. My mom didn't want the marriage because I was working at a laundry and providing money, and we had to eat. So she begged my father, no, don't let Rebecca get married. I need her. She thought she kind of solved it. She made a very dramatic plea. And she was very upset about this man that she had just met that wanted to marry me, because his father and mine had served time together in the Utah State Penitentiary for polygamy crimes. Pretty soon the phone rang. Mom was almost crying, and she said, what do you mean the obstacle has been removed? A few minutes later, this guy shows up at the door with a brown manila envelope. He counts the cash out on the table, and I was getting married. Please understand that very few children are sold. At least I think, and I hope very few are sold in these polygamous cults. Most of them are bartered off for power. You've all heard of Warren Jeffs yearning for Zion Ranch and what went on in Texas. Warren Jeffs' father, Rulon Jeffs, performed my marriage when I was a child bride. And yet, when you look at the should I say, propaganda on television, they say, we're against child brides, we're against this, we're against that. The same women that are there advocating it are like the same women that are held bondage in any sex trafficking. And it is sex trafficking in the name of God. In the name of God. If women bring in more women, they're treated better. In any sex trafficking, I don't care if it's a pimp or a prophet. But when a prophet says, you will marry this person, and we were told we had our free agency. I was told a few hours before I was married, you have your free agency. You have a choice. You can live plural marriage, celestial marriage, polygamy, and go to heaven to the highest degree of glory, or the only way you can be saved is to suffer blood atonement. Jesus did not die for your sins. And we love you and we want you to go to heaven and be saved, but the choice is yours. So you have your free agency. Now, choose. That's like holding a gun to a kid's head and saying, you have your free agency. Are you going to do what I say, or should I pull the trigger? Some of us had a real choice. We had a choice whether to marry Uncle so-and-so who was 62 or Uncle so-and-so who was 68. The choice might even be somebody younger, but the choice was never, under any circumstances, outside of polygamy. That was not a choice. Different cult leaders have different degrees of benevolence or lack of benevolence, just like different people, personalities. But these cult leaders are all tied together. Many of you probably remember Tom Green. He was television's darling with these child brides. Tom Green, they finally investigated him and found out that his youngest wife, Linda, was only 13 when he married her. Tom had 4 child brides. They were all his stepdaughters. He married women with children and seduced their children. Linda, according to the investigative report on the crime, was actually having sex with Tom when she was 12. Linda is my niece. When I begged my brother to do something and help his daughter, he said, I can't. I'm a polygamist. You don't know what would happen to me. I cannot blow a whistle on my brethren. I cannot. Is that not organized crime, ladies and gentlemen? Is that not a sign of organized crime? Tom Green flaunted his polygamy. A little while ago, you saw Winston Blackmore come forward, especially on Canadian television, flaunting his polygamy. Winston Blackmore had an airplane. He was the Bishop of Bountiful. And Winston Blackmore had 7 child brides. And there's documentation on the web, you can look this all up. How many of them were trafficked? Trafficked! Back and forth to the United States. Mr. Uller took his little sister up there and traded her for him a child bride. This is documented. None of these child brides would testify against Winston. They were no longer children, but they were still in Bountiful. And people said, oh, well, if they won't testify, they don't have a case. Ladies and gentlemen, would you testify against the Nazis if you were still in the concentration camp? What are they thinking? Survival is here. I know from personal experience that the best way to punish a woman is to hurt her children. I watched my babies be waterboarded if I didn't obey. This is common. You don't go into a big polygamous meeting where there's hundreds of children and hear a child cry. Interesting. Also interesting that I don't know hardly any polygamous kids that are good at water sports. They don't know why, they just hate water. Famous polygamists, a while back in the 1970s, Dr. Rulon Allred was gunned down in his Murray, Utah office. It was all over the Salt Lake City Tribune, all over the television, everywhere. Who was this man? He was the head of the AUB. He was my uncle. He was gunned down by a rival cult leader, Ervil LeBaron. Ervil LeBaron wanted to be the only prophet of polygamy, the one. Ervil was responsible for approximately 30 murders. All the bodies have not been found. Who was Ervil? He was my brother-in-law's brother. His brother, Rulon LeBaron, was married to 2 of my sisters and 1 of my cousins. And because they were in the cult in Mexico, they obeyed no rules of their own. Of course, they don't anyway. They're above the law. They speak for God. My sister, Irene, was down there. She had 12 children. She asked too many questions, which is really forbidden of a woman. Ervil made a hit list of people to be murdered, and her name was on it. She got her 7 youngest children in a little Mazda car, and she headed for the United States border. She couldn't even tell her oldest children because they would have to tell to save themselves, or they would be guilty. She told no one. The car broke down in New Mexico. I had escaped from Salt Lake City with my 6 daughters and married a normal guy and been married just a few months when we got the call that the car broke down and the highway patrol called us. We went and got her and we brought her home. I was in Las Vegas at the time. And we moved here to Humboldt County to hide her and save her life. Today she's a New York Times best-selling author because she wrote her story, Shattered Dreams, of her life in the polygamous cult. She also wrote a book called Cult Insanity. Everything in it is documented and true. I saved the newspaper articles over the years and gave them all to her when she decided to write the book. And it's all on the web. When I read Cult Insanity, it was like a bad acid trip. It was that hard to see that much negative reality between those pages and read it in a couple of days like you read a book. And I lived it, so I knew it was true, but it really left me feeling horrible. And I thought, what about the people that don't even know this is true? How horrible does it make them feel? The polygamists everywhere, Owen and Jeffs, Canada, Mexico, all the different polygamous cults, that incidentally are all tied in. I have female relatives in every one of them. The girls are trafficked back and forth between every one of them. You're born and raised in polygamy. Each polygamous leader claims he's the only mouthpiece of God on earth. And yet isn't it great that underneath it all they have such a brotherhood, that they can exchange women freely, that I could have female relatives in every polygamous cult I know. Recently, the Rolling Stones wrote an article about the Kingston clan in Utah. Did anybody read that? They noted them as a high crime organization. Unbelievable. Polygamous. Sure, I have nieces in that polygamous group too. Say, where does the crime come in? Just in the trafficking? No. Sex trafficking in the name of religion is very profitable, just like sex trafficking everywhere. The only thing is, if you capture children and you sell them in the sex market during the most favorable years of their life, and you're caught, you can go to prison. That's a crime. But if you marry them in an illegal ceremony, or even claim that they're married, and have children by them when they're still children, and keep them and their children in slavery for the rest of their life, it's called freedom of religion. And people turn the other way. Especially when you can get the women to stand up and endorse it. The women have to stand up and endorse it. Would you not stand up and endorse it if you couldn't have the right to your children and they were threatened? I don't believe that Kody Brown threatens his wives with physical violence. It's not really his personality. But I do believe he threatens them on a regular basis with eternal damnation, hell, losing their soul, their children, because the glue that holds polygamy together is not faith, it's fear. I grew up with a bloodthirsty and terrifying God. Our God was so mean, the devil was on unemployment and could get only a part-time job as a scapegoat. We had no need for a devil. There was no difference between our God and the devil. He was the same guy. Because our God wanted us murdered if we didn't follow blindly. Women are supposed to put their husband as their Lord and Master on earth and follow him blindly. The husband's supposed to follow the prophet. You say, oh, this is ideal for men. No, it's not. Let me explain to you how organized crime works, all of it. The MO of organized crime is like a pyramid game. There's the guy at the top, and he's got some lieutenants below him, and then he's got people below him until it spreads out at the bottom, and at the bottom there's always the poverty line of the women and children. Always. Say, how do these boys get into this? If they're kids in a gang in the city, they get in because they're promised money, power, sex, bling, for nothing. And they believe it. So they jump in. In a polygamous cult, they're promised many wives, many children, power, godhood. Same thing, just on a different level. Now it's all God giving you this, but it's still power. It's great power. And you watch the polygamous man, and you watch the guy that jumped into the gang in the city. And he works his way up through the ranks for a few years. And he looks great. He's got a briefcase, a fine car, and a good suit. People look at him and say, he has everything. He does. He has everything except his life. He no longer has his own life. It doesn't belong to him. The guys above him will take him out if he becomes a nuisance. Polygamy is the same way, only they take you out a little differently. They can kill you, but they seldom do. There are blood atonements, but not very many, even though Ervil killed a lot of people, and people said, oh, he's not part of our cult, we're not affiliated with them. Not affiliated, their blood relatives were all intermarried, but they have a different bank account with a different church name. So they can claim no affiliation. There's no such thing as no affiliation. The basic doctrine that created that murder is fundamental in every single one of them. All of them. The crazy thing about Ervil was he carried it out. When I was a kid, my father went to prison. He said he went to prison as a martyr for God because they were persecuting polygamists. But he had a child bride with 5 children. I think that's why he went to prison. Because they don't prosecute polygamy, per se. And she took her children to her family in Escalante, Utah. While she was there, she took an airplane ride and she was killed. The state of Utah let my father out of prison and gave him back the children she had escaped with if he promised not to live polygamy. He took 2 more wives after that. And those children were raised to believe that their mother was killed by God because she broke her covenants with Daddy. And Daddy said God killed her so he wouldn't have to. In other words, we were raised on the blood covenant from the day of our birth. We were raised with that fear. And this is true with all these polygamists that are out there preaching for a choice. It's a lifestyle choice. A choice I wouldn't want my woman to have and she can't have it. That's my lifestyle choice. It's sex trafficking in the name of religion. It's slavery in the name of religion. If Utah decides to decriminalize polygamy, it will have an effect on every woman's rights. And here's why. If marriage no longer holds the bonds that it was designed for, you will be affected. If polygamy is decriminalized, a woman, any woman, can file a paternity suit. That doesn't mean she can collect. All the guy's got to do is have so many kids they can't have any money left. She can never collect. Also, polygamists are famous for taking the money, because women aren't allowed to handle money, not even their welfare check, and investing it in a ranch or something held by the church, in an LLC or a corporation. She could never touch it. God bless Texas, they're taking Owen and Jeffs' ranch away and making him pay for some of the things he did. I'd like to see some of that happening in the rest of the United States. We don't need prisons. We need responsibility. If you force the responsibility on the people who create it, polygamy will shrink. It will grow as long as we keep financing it, because we pay welfare to all those unwed mothers. We provide housing, and the houses usually belong to the men they're married to. The government pays the rent. We pay daycare centers, etc. And they incorporate and make towns out in the desert, and they're all polygamous towns, so they get police stations, schools, roads, all paid for by the government. And the statistics are on the web. Winston Blackmore, nobody would testify against him. They got him like they got Al Capone. $4.5 million in arrears, back taxes, personal taxes. How does a bishop of a polygamous cult make that kind of money? If there's not money in this, why was Rulon Jeffs holdings worth $110 million earning for Zion Ranch? That's just part of his holdings. Every polygamous leader is wealthy. And the women at the bottom of the totem pole, some of them live poorer than they do in India. It's child trafficking. I hope that women will stand up and say, this is not choice. It's coercion. Whenever there's coercion and there's a negative alternative in this life or the next, for you're not complying, it is not freedom of choice. We need to know that, ladies, and your rights are at stake today in Utah.
Thank you. What most of you don't realize is Rebecca has been so generous this week, and I showed up to do her interview, which I showed up a day early, and so she said, well, why don't you just hang out here? So for a couple of days, we interviewed her for the documentary, and I want to thank you for your hospitality. But you've never mentioned about your TV shows that you have. Can you tell the audience real quick about that?
I do have a TV show, Access Humboldt, Tuesday nights, 7 o'clock. And I actually give them some other material, which is played whenever they want to. I really enjoy the opportunity to have this TV show because it gives me the opportunity to meet wonderful people like you.
Thank you.
Wonderful people that are making a difference in lives in their community. Heroes from World War II, prisoners of war, people that make us think. I have a very, very wide interview site. I love it. I feel blessed to be able to do it, and I feel honored to be able to help get some of this information out and help educate the public on many levels.
Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. www.RebeccaKimbel.com. If you remember how to spell my name, that's Kimbel. Search me on the web. You'll find out more than you wanted to know.
Thank you so much. God bless.